Washington's hosting some big-time transfer portal prospects.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. But just a reminder before we get into that, make sure you subscribe wherever you're getting this podcast. Leave a like on the video, leave a comment down below with some players you want to see Washington add in the transfer portal. We always love getting some feedback from our everydayers. It's a lot of fun. We enjoy interacting with you as much as we possibly can. And with that being said, we got a really fun show. We're talking external candidates for defensive coordinator. We talked about the internal guys on a bonus show. Go back and check that out if you haven't. We put it out on Wednesday. We're going to talk about Tacario Davis, the star Arizona transfer who's in the transfer portal. A couple other guys who, maybe some of them we've talked about before. Some of them we might not. Stick around for that. But, Lars, there are two visitors that have been confirmed that are certainly at positions of need. One of them is West Virginia linebacker Josiah Trotter, and the other one is Texas defensive lineman. And he's a high recruit too. I always make sure that that's something, especially a defensive line, is really important. Jaray Webster, Texas defensive lineman Jaray Webster. Both those guys are coming in on official visits this coming weekend.
Yeah, I mean, little did I know at the time of our recording on Monday or Tuesday when it said, "Hey, look at this Texas defensive lineman that was previously at Arizona. Maybe keep an eye on him." Oh, I got the score right. Wrong guy. I got the score right though. And but it's similar to what we had talked about. We're getting P4 guys that have starting experience or rotational experience. In the case of Josiah Trotter, I mean, the lineage, the last name speaks for itself. We've been talking about a lot of last names here with the last name Belichick primarily. Jeremiah Trotter, father, and Jeremiah Trotter Jr., son, plays for the Philadelphia Eagles now. You have to imagine. I think he was also named the Big 12 Defensive Freshman of the Year this past season.
Yep, that's right.
Even though he redshirted in 2023, so he's not a true freshman. So he would, I believe, have 3 seasons of eligibility if my math is mathing on that one correctly. And that's exactly what you're looking for. Where ideally maybe you want a 1-year rental, but maybe let the guys grow together. Where you can figure that out as you go, and that's you're swinging big here early on.
So, but this is the thing, though. If you want to take a player like Trotter, because 92 tackles, he was super productive at West Virginia last season. Like you said, Big 12 Defensive Freshman of the Year. He was really, really good. Where that's part of it as well. Obviously, the lineage, the athleticism, it's all there when you turn on the tape. He is a lot of fun to watch. You look at all those things and you say, yeah, I get it. But at the same point, this is somebody who you pair a guy like that next to Kamori House, or even you put him in the rotation. Like, let's say, we'll talk about Jacob Manu a little bit later on as well. But let's say you want to start Josiah Trotter and Jacob Manu decides to go elsewhere for whatever reason. And you want to start those two guys all of a sudden, hey, that's a linebacker core right there. And you got Zadrius Randy-Saleh behind him. You got Jonathan Epperson, Donovan Robinson, Devin Bryant, Hayden Moore. All of a sudden, that linebacker room is really starting to shape up. And the more I look at it, the more I think they might end up taking 2 linebackers in this class. And because with this visit, we know that they're certainly going to be in on Jacob Manu. They're going to be in on all these former Arizona guys. We'll see what that ends up looking like as, over the next couple of weeks. But I look at Josiah Trotter and the bloodline, the background, all that is fantastic. It's exactly what you want in any prospect, really. But it goes so far beyond that. Like I said, the production, everything on tape is exactly what Robert Bala would want at the position. And he's one of those guys where you look at that and you say, if he wants to come visit, if he wants to come to Washington, you can't turn that guy down.
No, and I think it's also a case of it shows other potential linebackers in the portal, hey, look at this kind of talent we can attract, with or without Steve Belichick. That's the key with Robert Bala, as we mentioned on the bonus show. That's why that guy is so important, is look at the emphasis and look at the impact that he has on the recruiting trail, whether it's high school or portal. And then you also pair with the development that he showed this season. So I think from that perspective, and it also kind of does maybe indicate, well, are they running a 4-3, a 3-4? You can kind of play all 3 of those guys, have Manu, Trotter, and Kamori House. And the other
which we saw this season.
Exactly. And the other side of that equation is in the 2 deeps, you still have Saleh, Epperson, Donovan Robinson, Hayden Moore, Devin Bryant, whichever one of those guys you want to kind of factor in. You can also list them all on the depth chart. Forget it. You know, at that sort of situation, because they can all get snaps. And we saw Jedd do that. You're in the Jedd system of playing freshmen and empowering freshmen. There's no reason not to, because what's the other and this is one thing I don't think anybody's really thinking about, but it kind of came to mind as you were talking about maybe adding a second linebacker. What's the one area of massive weakness this season that traditionally at Washington has had starters on that this season did not? Special teams.
Oh, special teams. Yeah.
Special
teams. I was thinking back to the Brandon Wellington, Kyler Manu days.
No PTSD there. No, but with respect, because again, Brandon Wellington, former East Side Catholic guy, and all those sort of things. Kyler did his thing and got a bad rep and all those. Bob Gregory, glorious days. But the reason why I bring that up is that's why you can kind of play some of those freshmen there, mix in some of the starters on there, and try and maybe build up both the defense at linebacker and on special teams. Because let's be real, Peyton Waters is pretty good on coverage, and there was a couple other guys. Aside from that, you can pretty much scrub the entire kick coverage team and say, you know what, let's start over. Let's see what happens. Because I think, and that's where a guy like Trotter could also come into play, where maybe he starts, maybe he doesn't, maybe Manu's the starter and he plays significant minutes, but is also an impact guy on special teams. Like when you point to the NFL, as we were talking about building an NFL program, when Washington was in its glory run from 2016 to 2018, Chris Peterson, one of the staples of the program, was having starters on special teams.
Yeah, I agree.
That made a significant difference.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Sorry, I want to make sure we move on to Jaray Bledsoe as well, where we spent a lot of time on yesterday's show talking about defensive linemen, some of them being realistic targets, some of them maybe not. And Jaray Bledsoe certainly fits the mold of what you would expect in the transfer portal, where there aren't, like we said, there aren't going to be a lot of power forward guys that have a lot of production that are looking for a new home, because they are just so few and far between. Jaray Bledsoe fits exactly what Washington is looking for, where this is a guy who's a 4-star recruit in the 2022 class. He hasn't played a lot over his time at Texas, but you turn on that film, especially the high school film where, it's 3-4 years ago at this point, but you're looking for the traits because that's what you're looking for, where 9 times out of 10, unless, Mason Graham enters the transfer portal. I know, I'm just throwing the name out there, but unless somebody like that enters the transfer portal, there's a more than likely chance that you are betting on that player's traits translating to your system than anything else. And you're saying, we think that our coaching staff can coach this guy up. When you look at Jaray Bledsoe and what he's done at Texas I think he's got 110 snaps, something like that in his 3 years with the Longhorns, where, you can't really blame him, right? We've seen that team 2 years in a row now in bowl games where it's T'Vondre Sweat, it's Byron Murphy. They have a really strong defensive line. It's hard to get on the field there, but you say that's somebody who you want to take on a visit and say, hey, we think that we can find a way to turn this guy loose with more snaps. Yeah, that's a fantastic take in my opinion.
And former 4-star in the state of Texas in an interior defensive line position. You can always kind of have those high flashy edge guys that either boom or bust. Interior D-line that are 4 stars at 6'4", 295, 290, somewhere in the range that he's listed at. Those are hard to come by. And you talk about, okay, yeah, he rode the bench, wasn't able to get as much playing time. Maybe that's a fault of one of the coaching staff. How many times can you go, go throughout college football and you see, hey, well, he didn't play here, but now when he gave him 400 snaps here, all of a sudden he was like a game wrecker. And maybe it's Jason Capucci unlocking him. Maybe it's somebody, maybe it's a scheme unlocking, whatever it may be. But that's why it's better to go and get a P4 backup that was a former 4-star than, go down to the FCS ranks and hope that you can kind of not will it up to existence, but kind of just pray that, for lack of a better term, you're able to kind of level up pretty quick. You don't have to level up. You just have to snap up. And there's a massive difference between the two. And that's why, anytime you get P4 bodies, I think that's always going to be the sell, because you'd always rather go for a guy where you're looking, and there's motivation there. It's like, hey, you're a former 4-star. We are giving you another P4 opportunity here. This is probably going to be one of your last ones if it doesn't work out here. And when you look at the defensive line options at Washington, no reason why he couldn't start, or at least be in contention to start.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing is you can come into Washington, and that's probably the biggest selling point at this point in time. You can come in right now and win yourself a significant amount of reps if you practice well in the spring and in the fall. But Lars, we got to move on to the Arizona guys, because there are a few interesting names out there. which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, which is great news for anybody who wants to go check out Husky basketball, the Seahawks, the Kraken, any concerts that might be coming up. I know I'm probably going to check out Game Time for the Kendrick Lamar show in May. Can't wait for that. It's so great because you can use Game Time Picks, where curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. With all-in pricing, you can toggle this feature to show the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with seat views, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. You can take the extra work out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Lars, there are some interesting things going on in Arizona where it's falling apart. They were 4-8 this last season, and everybody's leaving. Jocker. That's all I think either of us will have to say on that matter. But among the players that are leaving is Tacario Davis. This is somebody who's in the transfer portal in January, seemed like he was really considering following John Richardson and this coaching staff up here to Washington, decided to go back to Arizona and stick it out with a bunch of other guys for the 24 season. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out for him the way he might have hoped. And this is a guy who was getting first-round draft buzz at a period of time. And he was still really solid. He was all Big 12 second team, I believe. And he wasn't as productive as he was when he led the Pac-12 with 16 pass breakups, but this is a guy with elite traits and elite size and somebody who works really well with John Richardson. And it's not going to be easy to secure his commitment, where Texas is certainly going to be in there. I feel like I saw somewhere that Georgia is going to be involved, where if you find a way to win out for Tacario, we talked about the defensive coordinator. We're going to talk more about that later on. I think that any defensive coordinator would love to get a chance to work with him.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going through the PFF grades from Tacario. The difference from 2023 to 24, my word. It's like the reverse of Washington from 21 to 22, where it's just like he was in 85% range in 23, and then we're talking 6. And it's not, again, he didn't fall off, but I think it's more or less speaks to the coaching, where it's like, look what happens when John Richardson isn't with you. Look what happened when John Richardson was with you. Like, that's your first selling point. And now, again, it's going to be hard, where in this day and age, you can't necessarily fault the kid where, if you get X dollar here and let's say it's, 300,000 or 400,000 more than another school. That's it's life-changing money for some of these kids. So you can't, and I understand that people will be like, oh, it's not all about the money. It's like, no, you're right. It's absolutely not. That's why the Richardson selling point is there. Washington has the resources, I'm sure, to be in the ballpark, no doubt be in the discussion when it comes to like his final list of schools. But there is also the allure of playing in the SEC, playing for Texas, playing for Georgia, playing for certain other schools where you're not going to lose them to Nebraska. You're not going to lose them to Michigan. You're not going to lose them to certain schools. But there are certain other ones that are like, I don't know about that. But I think, man, if you could get him to pair with Prysock, that it almost like everything builds off of itself, where whether the defensive coordinator hire is made immediately or whatever the case may be. And again, no official moves at this time as we record this, here on Wednesday, Wednesday afternoon. Nothing has officially been made in terms of any formal departures. But I would have to imagine, whether the defensive coordinator gets hired first or some of these commits start to happen, I think it's like one's going to attract the other. Like there's going to have some talent that attracts the talent. And that's why keeping some of those Arizona coaches was so important, where, yes, you could bring in some outside-the-box hires, but a lot of the staff and those relationships are still built from Arizona. And so, we went through the names back in January, February, March, when it's like, hey, like, we're hearing a lot of guys are probably going to transfer to Washington, and that didn't come to fruition. And, imagine what could have been. But I think this is kind of like, okay, second time around, Tacario has got to be one of those premium guys, aside from, Jacob Monner and a few others at the top of the list.
Yeah, Wendell Moy being another one of those names where it's, it's in the same vein of, we talked about the Auburn visit. We talked about the things that he's got coming up and the offers that he's reporting. Where are you going to be able to find out to win out over those schools? And because we talked about it a lot on yesterday's show, where it's a big turning point for what Jedd's culture is and what he wants it to be. Where he said, hey, we developed a brotherhood. We developed this, we developed that, and we were able to sustain it. We brought a lot of those guys up here. And now you have a chance to really, you talk about how good that 2023 season was for him, I don't want to say recreate it, because that's certainly not what it is, but to have a lot of guys that were key pieces on that team in place for a season that could end up being very similar. We know the schedule got released as we record this on Wednesday. We'll talk about that more at a later point in time, but you can kind of look at it and say, I see why it might be able to line up in a certain way for the Huskies. And again, you mentioned Jacob Manu. You mentioned Wendell Moy. Another guy we need to mention is Gunnar Maldonado, where one of their safeties, he was a really productive player for them as well, where that's the kind of guy where we talked about potentially Washington bringing in a safety. We've seen an offer or two go out. It's so hard to track transfer portal offers. Total side note, going to ask a question from one of our insiders about that. And yeah, tracking transfer portal just offers is a very frustrating, difficult thing to do, but that's beside the point. That's just my little rant for the day. Gunnar Maldonado is the perfect guy to come in and replace Cameron Fabiculanen, where it looks like he's in his last year of eligibility, and he's somebody who you don't need to ask to do a whole ton, where you just need another body in the room to be that veteran leader who can be really productive and tackle, but at the same point is going to be rotated a lot with a Peyton Waters or Rashawn Clark or, Paul Menke, Raheem Wright, whoever you might want to say. And it's just, that's another guy who I'm going to be watching really closely as somebody who is just an interesting name, in my opinion, from things I've heard.
Yeah, it's what we kind of always talk about, where getting a veteran, especially with all these young guys, where you don't need to add 3, 4, 5, or even 2, 3, 4 guys. You're just adding kind of that one upperclassman that can just, you don't want to say kind of like, you're not babysitting, but it's almost kind of just be the glue, find that same thing with Manu at linebacker, where it's like, look, just be the glue that keeps all these young guys together, bring some of the freshmen on up, because you're only here for 1 year. He's a grad transfer.
Yeah.
So as you said, you're not looking for a long-term solution here. But if you don't have that, we've seen at times what happens if you're playing 2 true freshmen or 2 true sophomores that maybe haven't necessarily started a game or two, where you're talking about Peyton Waters will have played 12 games this season, well, I guess 13 after the bowl game, but not started at safety. So played significant reps at safety, but not starting. And as we saw from DeMond, there's a difference between coming in as a reserve, coming in on special teams, and coming in and being an actual starter. And having a veteran just in that room, we saw what Cam Fab did. I think when we get to talk to some of the players in the spring, I'll be curious to see how much did those veteran guys, Carson Alfonso, help Kamori and the younger guys in that respect, and kind of draw down. And Gunnar Maldonado is that perfect kind of safety that you need, where you already have a free safety. You're kind of just looking for a guy, not an enforcer per se, but just a veteran back there that can just hold his own.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. And there's you talk about veterans, about guys that when you look for production, we've talked a lot about defensive linemen, talked a lot about what that might look like. There's another one down there in Uiagaleilei, where he's somebody that is in the transfer portal. There's starting to float some rumors that he might be headed this way. I'd be curious to see how that works out, because he's super productive, where this past season, I got his numbers in front of me this time, where 33 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2.5 of them were sacks, where he's a guy that you talk about finding a little bit of production from that defensive tackle spot. He's somebody who can certainly do that, where I think that he's somebody who's not necessarily a full-time starter, where, if you go out and get, say, one of these Texas guys or just a couple other players in there, where maybe you can make it work in a rotation where there's no, true starter, where it's everybody's getting 15 snaps here, 15 snaps there in, a true hockey line sort of style to keep everybody as fresh as possible, where that might be the best fit for him. But he's certainly somebody that, we just talked about it with Tacario. It's knowing the system. It's installing the culture, like a Jacob Manu, who's one of the captains down there. If you want to install Jedd Fisch's culture, you want the guys that were in that system and also productive, because it's not, we're just taking these guys because we like the way they're going to fit our locker room, fit our culture. No, you need guys to be productive on the field as well. And that's why we wanted to bring up all these names, because all those guys in that same vein are also productive on the field.
Exactly. When you have all the established relationships. Now, again, maybe Nansen played a little bit of a role in some of those guys, but Kafusi, I can't say too much, but it just, those guys have those relationships, and they felt for how the season went down there. I can tell you just, they weren't happy with those guys and the way things went down there. And it's almost like, hey, look, this year is kind of a wash year. Washington goes 6-6, Arizona's 4-8, but everything was about laying the foundation for Washington this year. Now that you're looking for the pieces to say, look, we got the foundation, but we still need you guys to supplement Tacario, Jacob Manu, and Uiagaleilei. And it's those similar things where you can still add 2 or 3 more defensive tackles or interior guys, And whichever one pops, because you still have Javon Parker and Armon Parker. You still have Bryce Butler and X down the list. But it's, as you said a week or so ago, get as many bodies as you can in the room and let the as Jimmy Lake used to say, let the cream rise to the top. Somebody in that room is going to figure it out. It's better to have all those bodies there. And if you got to move him to right end, because he also played 140 snaps at right end this year. So there's versatility and flexibility that you can use with him. He's not just like a pure nose tackle in that respect. So all this versatility just says, look, if you have 5 guys on the list, take 3 and let them figure it out. And that's really kind of what I could even see, like no matter who runs the defense, it's probably what it's going to be like.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. We need to switch this conversation though. You talk about running the defense. We got to get to some external candidates that we like, which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Talked about it yesterday. Thursday night tonight. Love the Juwan Jennings numbers over in catches, over in yards. Give me an anytime touchdown. He torched the Rams defense last time. Feels like he might be in for another big game after they gave up, 42 points last week to the Bills. And on the other side, Cooper Kupp over in yards. Give me an anytime touchdown for him as well. Got to show some love to Puka Nacua. He's becoming Matthew Stafford's favorite target. Over in catches for Puka and another anytime touchdown. You can check out so many more odds just like those over on FanDuel. Lars, let's jump into some external candidates. We talked about Robert Bala, why he might be a good fit for the job on our bonus show yesterday, but we're going to have some fun with this one. I've got a couple outside the box names. We've heard, all the names that people are throwing around on Twitter. I know there was Jim Mora, Johnny Hanson. There's a little bit of everything going around on Twitter. I saw Court Dennison's name in there. There are all those different names out there. Is there anyone that stands out to you, realistic or not, that you say this would be a fun fit?
So I want to leave the other two that I know we talked about before the show yesterday to unpack, because I want to let you because I agree with one of them. Johnny Hanson, no way, no chance. No, the Court Dennison one actually does intrigue me only as an alum and the perspective. But I don't know about it. Now, is it as a linebackers coach and you promote, that there's kind of some negotiation there, because otherwise I kind of want to turn it over to what you suggested the other day with another Bob, shall we say.
Oh, yeah. So this is another one I saw floated on Twitter a couple of different times, and it's Robert Saleh, where I have a couple different schools of thought on this. First of all, I in no way, shape, or form think this is actually going to happen. But I think it's really fun for, any non-NFL fans out there. Robert Saleh was the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers for a couple of years, got the job with the New York Jets as the head coach. They fired him early on in the season, or Aaron Rodgers fired him, I should say. And he went and was a defensive analyst with Matt LaFleur and the Green Bay Packers for the remainder of the season. He's probably going to be there through the playoffs. But I look at a guy like that and I say that would be a lot of fun. Another name in that same light that somebody else brought up to me is Matt Eberflus, who was an interesting defensive coordinator when he was in Indianapolis, not as a head coach. But I don't disagree, and I don't think either of those things would happen. But it's interesting to bring up some of those outside the box NFL names because we didn't think Steve Belichick was going to get this job. That didn't seem like it was a realistic possibility. That was a name we never even considered, to be frankly honest. But I look at a guy like Robert Saleh, where it would the biggest reason that I don't think that he or some of these other guys might end up getting the job is it would be such a quick departure scheme wise, where if you want to promote Robert Saleh, like we talked about yesterday, it's a lot easier to say, hey, for all the guys that are already in the room, we can keep the scheme intact. You're not going to have to learn anything different. We can get the freshmen up to speed a lot faster because we know what we're doing. And, if somebody is coming in from the outside, we want them to run our scheme. They probably wouldn't want to do that. So promote, whoever from the interior or from the internal side of things, hire a new coach at that position. But I don't know, man, like there's something about somebody in that mold, that big splash hire that we didn't think was going to happen last offseason, about just the energy and just the NFL side of things that it brings.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Jedd has consistently been selling is the NFL side, where his relationships, he can call up Howie Roseman and say, hey, who's a good defensive coordinator to hire? Who's, call Nick Saban up or call Bill Belichick up and say, hey, Bill, who are you not hiring on your staff at UNC that you'd be willing to let me hire at Washington? Let me just run this thing. Let's trade, right? We can't trade players, but we can trade coaches, right? Well, I'll give you Steve, not that you need my permission, but I'll give you Steve and you give me who in return. Because I think there's kind of two schools of thought where, okay, do you want to go get somebody from the NFL level that could basically just kind of come in and run back what Steve did? Or do you, and by the way, if Brian Belichick doesn't go, do you bring him? Like,
no,
I just want.
We're not going down this road.
No, I know. But again, because the two schools of thought are the realistic. Like, do you go another New England Patriots former guy like Jedd, or do you just Jedd? There's plenty of guys that Jedd knows outside of that whole time with the Patriots. There's plenty of guys that we're not even thinking of right now that Jedd could have said, hey, I mean, who would have thought Mike Macdonald would have known Ryan Grubb? I mean, I may or may not have had an off the record conversation, so I can't really, expose that per
divulge.
Se. But, I was privy to a relationship that nobody else would have expected. And even I was like, when I found out, I was like, wait, like, how did that relationship come out? And the response was, well, just football dudes. And so Jedd is a football dude. And so, there's going to be somebody out there like that. I would prefer somebody, maybe with a little more experience. And if you're not going to go with the internal candidate, you're going to leave Bala at linebackers coach and just kind of run with that theory. Then I think it needs to be a splash hire. If you're going to end up promoting Bala, then that external candidate, maybe for a different position, like you mentioned, whether it's safety or linebacker, then I think it becomes a little more interesting. And that's where like a Corey Dennison can come into play where by the way, the one thing I do not want to see, no co-DC, none of it.
Oh, please. Never again.
That is the one thing that I don't think Jedd will do it, but just if I'm going to break a prediction Jedd, whether you're listening to the show or not today, don't do it.
Yeah.
I don't care who the hire is, unless it's John Donovan of the defense, don't do it. Like, there's no reason to kind of spread that thin and things like that. Yeah, you're welcome for that. Actually, you know what?
I was going to say defensive analyst with the Green Bay Packers, John Donovan.
Exactly. You'll be electric.
No.
Somehow
we can't go down this road. I'm stopping you here. We cannot go down this road today. Because I certainly know where you're going with that. But Lars, I like your thought process when you talk about just some of these external candidates and you talk about a splash, where this is what I'm really curious about in this sense, where we know how the NFL coaching cycle works. We know that within the next couple of weeks, we're going to start hearing about more staffs that are getting fired. And we know Jedd has had a long history in the NFL, coaching with different teams, making connections all over the league, all over college. So my question is, how are you going to do this? Are you going to do this quickly and say, hey, it's transfer right now. We need to get somebody in here ASAP because we need this, we need that. We need to make sure that these guys are coming in with a guarantee of this is going to be their defensive coordinator. Or do you slow play a little bit, take that risk, and, maybe say, hey, these are the guys we're looking to hire to any transfer portal products you want to bring in. But we're going to be waiting because we're hearing this staff might be out. For example, the New York Giants, like if Brian Dable's staff gets fired. And I'm just throwing that out there as an example. There's no coach on the New York Giants staff that I'd be like, yes, bring that guy to Washington. But I bring that up as an example of, do you want to wait for, as they call it, Black Monday, and say, okay, we're going to interview 3 or 4 different guys that were on some of these staffs that are looking for a new job. I'd be curious to see if that's the case, where it might not be the biggest splash, but at the same point, it's a way to still have that NFL experience and potentially retain some of the scheme things that you really liked about the Steve hire.
Yeah, well, and then the other situation you could also think is if you hire a DC and position coach for one role, that opens up another spot on the staff. If you think about it, like, so you could kind of create, value in other positions if you want to maybe address special teams and, kind of change this, because in a way, this could have a domino effect where it's either a like for like and you just swap Steve out for a DC, call it a wrap, move on. Or do you start to retool a couple of different things and you could add, with the college staffs growing and things like that? Because one name that it's not necessarily DC coordinator hire, but one guy, analyst that maybe Jedd and the coach on the staff has connections with that you might recognize his name, Joe Houston.
Oh, yeah.
Now he's the senior analyst at Florida, so not in a position of, coordinator or anything like that. So again, if you want to bring other types of coaches like that with NFL and prominent Power 5 experience, there's a lot of different ways you can go. So the reason I just throw that name out there is to say, look, there is a massive, kind of list of guys that you can go from this group tier 2, and then tier 3. Not that Joe is a tier 3, but there are different kind of ways in which Jedd can go about this. And this, speaking of laying the foundation, you're kind of doing that and also trying to advance the foundation at the same point with this hire. So he's got to get it right.
Oh, you're absolutely right. He's got to get it right because this is a very pivotal time where you want to make sure you hang on to these guys, bring in the right transfer portal pieces. And on top of that, you want to show that you can take a step forward and compete in the Big Ten. Those are all very important things in 2025. And the right defensive coordinator hire is going to be a huge part of that. But Lars, I got a bold prediction before we get out of here. Whoever is going to be the hire is nobody that we just mentioned. It's going to be way different than everything we just talked about. And with that being said, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it. You can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. And that's also where you can find this podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get that. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.